If you had $1,000 a month to invest, you'd want the best index funds, right? Then you'd probably spend a weekend arguing about which three. In this video, John is settling the which three argument. One fund to anchor it, one to chase growth, and one almost everybody says to leave out. I'll show you what each fund is, what it holds, and why it makes the cut. And by the end, I'll show you how all three together are projected to turn John's $1,000 a month into $4.3 million. So here's the plan. John's not dropping his $1,000 into one fund and hoping. He's splitting it across three, and each one's got a different job. The first is the anchor. Boring, cheap, the thing everything else is built around. The second is the growth fund, the one swinging for the big returns. And the third is the one every best of list skips. 3 funds, 3 jobs. Get the anchor right first because it's the one the other two lean on. Fund 1, FXAIX. Look, nobody starts investing dreaming about the S&P 500. It's the plain oatmeal of index funds, but that's kind of the point. FXAIX is Fidelity's S&P 500 fund, so when John buys it, he's buying a slice of the 500 biggest companies in America. Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, all of them in one shot. And it's almost free to own. The expense ratio is 0.02%, which comes out to about 20 cents a year for every $1,000 invested. You'll spend more on one coffee than on an entire year of holding this. The numbers are about what you'd expect from something this steady. FXAIX pays a dividend yield right around 1.04%, and it's grown that payout close to 6.84% a year over the last decade. But the number that carries the fund is the share price, historically climbing about 13.39% a year, and that's what does the real compounding. Now, here's something most people don't realize about index funds. That 500 companies makes it sound evenly spread out, but it's actually more top-heavy than you think. About 39% of the whole fund sits in just its 10 biggest names, and nearly the same share rides on tech alone. So FXAIX moves with the giants a lot more than the 500 stocks label suggests. When they have a big year, it flies. And that's not a knock on it. This is still the cheapest, steadiest core money can buy, the foundation you build everything else on top of. It does one job, and it does it about as well as anything out there. But an anchor can really only do so much. It keeps you steady, but it doesn't make you rich in a hurry. For that, John needs something with a lot more fire. Fund 2, FNCMX. This one looks like the obvious upgrade. If the S&P gives you the 500 biggest companies, FNCMX, Fidelity's NASDAQ composite fund, hands John a few thousand. More companies heavier on tech, built to move fast. On paper, it's the S&P with the brakes off. And for years, it sat right at the top of the performance charts, the fund everyone points to when they want to show off a return. The number behind that reputation is the share price. FNCMX has climbed around 17.94% a year historically, comfortably the fastest of the three. The trade-off shows up in the income. It yields about just 0.45%, less than half the anchor, with dividend growth around 6.91%. You don't buy this one for the payout. You buy it for the climb. There's one thing worth understanding about how it gets that climb. For all those thousands of companies, more than half the fund, around 58%, sits in its 10 biggest names. And a lot of those names are the same giants the S&P already leans on. That's not a flaw. It's why it grows this fast. It's the market's biggest winners, concentrated. The fee reflects the extra reach, too, at 0.29%, nearly 15 times the anchors. Real quick, before we talk about the last fund, I use Seeking Alpha for basically all my stock research. And everything you've watched me pull up so far, the holdings, the yields, the growth rates, all of it came from there. And it's today's sponsor. Their alpha picks are the standout, 2 quant-rated stock picks a month. And they've beaten the S&P 500 by over 320%. They also just put out their top stocks report for the second half of 2026. It dropped July 14th. Quant-backed picks built around growth and the long game. It's their flagship for stock picking, available to members only. So if you want in on that, use my links down in the video description or the pinned comment, and you'll get 10% off alpha picks. If you want the premium or the bundle, both discounted links are in the description. Okay, back to John, because that overlap I showed you, the anchor and the growth fund owning the same names, it points straight at the piece John is still missing. One more fund that owns what those two don't. And remember, in the end, I'm going to show you how a portfolio of these 3 funds is projected to reach a $4.3 million valuation. But first, Fund 3, VTIAX, a completely different corner of the planet where everything you just learned about concentration flips on its head. VTIAX is Vanguard's total international fund. Where the growth fund crammed your money into 10 American giants, this one does the opposite. It holds around 8,800 companies from outside the U.S., Europe, Asia, emerging markets, basically the whole rest of the world in a single fund. How spread out is it? Its single biggest holding, a chip company out of Taiwan, is only about 4% of the fund. The top 10 together barely clear 15%. Nothing in here can sink you on its own. And the numbers flip everything you just saw. On a growth chart, this fund looks asleep. Share prices have only risen about 6.72% a year, less than half the growth fund's pace. But it pays the most while you wait, with a yield around 2.53%, more than double the anchor and roughly 5 times the growth fund. That's exactly why people leave it out, and exactly why that's a mistake. Because this is the only fund really diversifying, John. It owns names the other 2 never touch. It's the one doing the job John originally thought all 3 were doing. Okay, so now John has his 3. The only question left is how much of each? Well, John wants growth, but he's just watched what happens if he leans too hard on it, everything piled onto the same 10 stocks. So an even split is out, and so is investing it all into the exciting one. Therefore, the anchor gets the biggest share, 45%, $450 a month, straight into the S&P 500, because that's the part holding everything else steady. The growth engine takes 35%, $350 chasing the upside, enough to matter without betting the whole thing on it. And the rest, that last $200 a month, goes international, which sounds small, and it's meant to. It's enough to count on when the U.S. cools off, but not so much that it drags on him for 20 years while he waits. Put all 3 together and the blended portfolio comes out to about a 1.13% yield and 13.65% average annual appreciation, with the dividend growing near 6.8% a year. That appreciation number is the whole ballgame. It's what compounds. The yield's just a little cushion on the side. So now, let's see what this portfolio is projected to do. $1,000 a month across those 3 funds, simply left alone to run. Start with year 1. The projections show John's account at around $12,000, right about what he'll have paid in, 12 months of contributions. By year 10, the projections show the account at roughly $236,000. He'll have put in $120,000 of that himself. So at that point, about half of what he's holding is still just his own contributions. But by year 20, it changes character completely. The projection lands at just over $1.1 million, and only $240,000 of that is money he'll have paid in. The other $870,000 or so is what the market is projected to add. The compounding finally outgrows him. And by year 30, the portfolio is projected to reach $4.3 million. Of that, John will have paid in $360,000. The rest, nearly $3.95 million, is what the market is projected to add. Now, $4.3 million is a ridiculous number, but it's worth seeing what kind of $4.3 million it's projected to be, because it says everything about what these three funds actually are. Almost all of that growth is projected to come from share prices climbing, around $3.88 million of it. The dividends, reinvested the entire way, are projected to add only about $68,000. So by year 30, the portfolio is projected to generate roughly $5,433 a year in income, which is about $453 a month. That's not a flaw. It's the whole personality of this portfolio. John built a growth machine. Three funds pointed almost entirely at getting bigger, not at paying him along the way. And it's projected to get enormous. But if what you want is money showing up every month to live on, that's a completely different set of stocks. Click the video on the screen. I'll show you how to make $5,000 a month on just $25 a week.